طيب بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. Good afternoon to all of you. I want to just jump right in and talk about, I'm just going to jump, I think it's because there's like static over there, so I'm just going to. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit in line with the theme of glimpses from the life of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I was asked to talk about prophetic pedagogy or tarbiyatu an-nabawiyya. And I thought long and hard a little bit more, and I came to the conclusion that I'm not going to come and talk to you about what the Prophet ﷺ used in terms of how he taught, because that would turn this lecture into an intellectual vomit session. So as a result, you can find the book and look it up. But I want to come in a more broad perspective to say how the Prophet ﷺ, how we can use his entire life as a standard of pedagogy. Pedagogy is basically the study of education. It's the study of education from both an academic perspective and putting that into practice in the classroom as well. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ, yes, he used many different ways to teach. You know, we find in the Sunnah the Prophet ﷺ would take a piece of gold and a piece of silk, and he would say that these two things are haram upon the men of my ummah. But I'm not going to talk to you about those different techniques because, like I said, I don't want to. So I'm going to tell you about how we can utilize the entire life of the Prophet ﷺ as a way to teach. So we're going to look at so many different examples of events during the Prophet's life, as well as techniques that were employed by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how those different techniques serve as models in how we as parents or as educators or whoever it is in the position of teaching to use those models and examples to enlighten other people. So just to give you an idea of the direction of how we need to diversify our teaching standards, right? And I think one of the most rudimentary ways of teaching is when a teacher just comes in and asks the students to know certain types of information and simply parrot it, like I call it intellectual vomit. Right? So the teacher goes and tells it to the student, and the student gives it back onto the paper. And then the student gleefully marches on with his report card with the letter A on it, and then the parents are like, mashallah. That's not, I don't think that's the standard of education that we want. We want to diversify, and we want to look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ. A very simple example is, you find that there was a very nice story of a young man. He had a very bad habit. Very bad habit. And a lot of times when we deal with kids who have bad habits, a lot of times we'll just say, this kid is this or that kid is that. Bring the stick, right? I would prefer that to be a stick of chocolate. But the people simply want some sort of lecture, or they want some sort of discipline to get these kids to break off their habits. But this story I will tell you right now, and that is this mom. She had this frustration with her child. He had this bad habit. And so what happened was she told the sheikh, why don't you teach him how to remove bad habits? So the sheikh took him on a journey, and not really a journey, just a walk in the neighborhood. So he takes him on a walk in the neighborhood, and he's like walking and talking, and then he says, do you see that blade of grass over there? Now, of course, you might think, well, which blade of grass, right? Well, in the desert, how many blades of grass are there? So he's like, go take that blade of grass and pull it out of the ground. So he's okay, so he goes and pulls it out like a cinch, like a champ. He pulls it out, he's like, I pulled it out. So the scholar, he basically says to him that, okay, so keep walking, we're gonna keep walking through the neighborhood. And then after a while he says, do you see that chunk of weeds over there? He's like, yeah. He said, go pull that up. So this time he has to use much more energy to pull it up. And then he continues going, and he says, do you see that small bush over there? And he says yes, and now he says go and pull it up, and it takes so much energy within him to uproot this bush. And so he says, and that is how bad habits are. That is how bad habits are. And if you think about it, it's true. If you want to remove a bad habit, it's not just simply by sitting down a person and talking to it. This teacher, he did not relegate himself to a rudimentary style of disciplining and advising and just saying like, you should not have bad habits. And in many, many ways, the Prophet ﷺ, as we'll see in the next 10 examples, and we'll go through them inshallah at an adequate speed, the Prophet ﷺ himself, he went and he conducted himself in these following ways in order to serve as a role model to teach. So the first methodology employed by the Prophet ﷺ is simply to prioritize and to avoid those that are not worth his time. It's not trying to say the Prophet ﷺ didn't care. It's saying that the Prophet ﷺ would be very strategic in what he would give. So as educators, you don't just simply want to give all the information. You need to be very, very strategic of what information you give. The role of the khatib and the scholar in this particular position on the minbar, it is not just simply a symbol of authority, but it is also representing the great responsibility that the khatib or the lecturer standing at this lectern or at the prayer niche, at the mihrab, right, of discerning which topic is applicable, which topic is important. And so you'll find certain community members that I would like to call them as community eager beavers. And so they will come and they'll like gnaw through the entire administration and they'll say something like, Sheikh, could you talk about such and such a topic? And you're like, okay, thank you for the suggestion, out the window. Because the topic is totally irrelevant. It's something that they think that it is very, very important to them. They think it's like the size of Everest, or if many of you are Pakistani here, K2, right? So they think it's the size of that mountain, and if you don't talk about it, then it's, for them it's a major issue. So the Prophet ﷺ, he would always give priority to those that are important, the topics that he would focus on. So we find from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that when the Prophet ﷺ witnessed that this Bedouin came and relieved himself, right, in full glory and view of the other Sahaba, right, that the companions rushed to admonish this situation, and the Prophet ﷺ, he simply carried himself in a very dignified way, and you know the rest of the story. And I think this is not just simply an example of tolerance as well as exercising restraint in treating those who are in the wrong, but it is actually teaching an important lesson to the companions, and that is, it's just a small mess. Pour some water over it, life goes on. Like the TV show. Now, if any of you watched that, like in the 80s, life goes on. Okay. We also find that the Prophet ﷺ, during the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, we find that the Prophet ﷺ did not give much credence to the objections that Suhaib, right? He was saying like, well, if we knew that you were the Rasulullah, we wouldn't be fighting you. So he instructed Ali bin Abi Talib, and he says, take off Muhammad, Rasulullah, the Rasulullah part, and supplant it with the son of Abdullah. Now, for Ali bin Abi Talib, this was a big deal because he thought that this is, giving up a part of the religious identity. Because before that, he was saying, write down Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and the Prophet ﷺ, and then the other negotiating side, the Meccan team, they said, well, who is Ar-Rahman? So that's pertaining to the theology of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically pertaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet ﷺ says, okay, we'll just put Bismika Allahumma, in the name of Allah, that's it. And then when he goes and he says, take off the part of Rasulullah, you can think why Ali bin Abi Talib is a little hesitant to do so. Because we just removed Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and now we're removing Rasulullah. And these two components are they're the bedrock of the Shahada. And yet, the Prophet ﷺ didn't allow this to hinder the bigger picture of securing a future visit, right? And a lot of times in our community, we find that disputes arise from the failure to know how to prioritize. Right? Everyone has an idea, they want to do this, they want to do that, and this is how the Prophet ﷺ would teach us, that he would place priority on that is important and delay instruction on certain issues at a more appropriate time. The Prophet ﷺ, number 2, was able to see advantage at a time of disadvantage. The Prophet ﷺ was able to see advantage at a time of disadvantage, even when the odds are stacked against him. So we all know the famous story of when the Prophet ﷺ was in Ta'if after being rejected and humiliated by the 3 brothers. One of the brothers said, "Lan ukallimak, I will never ever speak to you." And the other brother said, "You're a liar." Right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he himself didn't just simply, break down and start hating on the world and start complaining about, why is this happening to me? The Prophet ﷺ, after being offered the opportunity to bring widespread destruction as retribution for his physical injuries, the Prophet ﷺ opted not to do that. And what did he say? He said, "I will hope that maybe one day that there will be someone from their progeny that will be believers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." So the Prophet ﷺ was able to see opportunity even at a time of disadvantage, if you want to put it like that. We also know that a great teaching method of the Prophet ﷺ is generosity. The Prophet ﷺ was not only a statesman, but he was a very, very big proponent of giving wealth to those who were around him. So the Prophet ﷺ, at the time of the conquest of Mecca, as well as the time before that, the battle of Hunayn and Ta'if and all these things, the Prophet ﷺ embarked on a widespread campaign of demonstrating that while we are amassing and taking over and legally appropriating for the ummah this wide amount of wealth, that this wealth was not simply going to go into Muhammad ﷺ's pockets, but that it was going to be going into the coffers of the Muslim ummah, and that it would be used for the sake of da'wah. So when Abu Sufyan comes and he says, "Ya Rasulullah, I want this, I want this, I want these camels, I want this sheep, etc., etc., the Prophet ﷺ would give it immediately to him. And when Abu Sufyan asked that, I want you to give it for my son, right? I want you to give it to my son. The Prophet ﷺ is not like, well, let him come and claim it. The Prophet ﷺ says, okay, then I'll give this to him as well, right? And this is something that I think for a lot of Muslim communities that a lot of people are still struggling with, and that is people fail to recognize the importance of philanthropy, even among those whom we share a humanity with. That yes, they might be non-Muslims, but it entitles them they are still entitled to sadaqah. After all, Islamic principles governing sadaqah giving and zakat giving, right? It was not only to benefit the Muslims, but it was also to benefit the society as a whole. It is to benefit the society as a whole. So when we start limiting and saying, well, that sadaqah, why should we give it to those who are in the church or the people who have been struck by a tornado? We are not doing a service to the Muslims. We're actually doing a disservice to the Muslims by not reaching out to them. So the Prophet ﷺ used this as an example. The fourth example is the Prophet ﷺ was always open to suggestions and opinions of other people. Now, it's not trying to say that the masjid leadership should be an open suggestion box where everyone comes, folds a piece of paper, puts it in, and then gets upset when the suggestion is not implemented. The Prophet ﷺ would implement suggestions wherever they were appropriate. So we know of the famous story that when Salman al-Farisi came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said that I know of a warfare tactic that if you were to employ this means, it would provide reasonable amount of security. And the Prophet said, and of course he said, is this decision that you have made of planting and placing the troops in this fashion, is this a divine